Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're ready. I think we're ready to do this. So I'm Megan Houghton. I am a staff associate for strategic engagements in the National Science Foundation's Computer and Information Science and Engineering Directorate. And I've had the privilege of working on developing our Smart and Connected Communities program, which we've heard several speakers refer to throughout the morning. So I've also had the privilege of working on the Smart Cities and Communities Interagency Task Force that the federal government uses to coordinate activities related to smart cities across the entire federal government. And through that, I've had the privilege of working with our next speaker, several of his colleagues at NIST. So I'll ask, Dave is going to join us. Dr. Dave Woolman is Deputy Director of the Smart Grid and Cyber-Physical Systems Program Office in the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. Dr. Woolman is working to expand NIST's coordination and research activities in the cyber-physical systems and Internet of Things area. He co-leads the NIST Cyber-Physical Systems Framework effort and is coordinating and accelerating the development of smart grid interoperability standards. Dave will be sharing NIST's efforts in promoting convergence in smart cities and communities, focusing specifically on community engagement and interconnected infrastructures, which aligns very well with our morning and afternoon themes. So Dave, thanks very much for joining us today. I look forward to your talk.
Thank you very much, Megan. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon. We heard this morning some great examples of working within communities, and I'm going to provide an additional federal viewpoint following on my colleague Erwin from the National Science Foundation. And as Megan pointed out, we've been able to work together in the interagency process. One thing that I wanted to mention up front is that Erwin had mentioned cyber-physical systems. I'm going to use cyber-physical systems and Internet of Things oftentimes somewhat interchangeably. Some folks would make a distinction between them. I prefer more general definitions, but I will point out that NIST has been working on a unified CPS mathematical model that applies to both equally. One of the goals that we have here is to talk about convergence. Oftentimes when new technologies develop, there's a huge outreach, different efforts take root, and you can get divergence. You can get it in the standards bodies. You can get 100 different solutions to things. Internet of Things, there's all these different solutions. So one activity is, a mental activity is, how do we promote convergence? How do we get to, for example, with Wi-Fi? It works with your laptop. How do you get to a technology that proves itself and becomes part of life in a reproducible, scalable fashion? That's what we're trying to do with several of our programs and activities. And I'm going to try to bridge between the morning and the afternoon, between the community engagement as well as what we're doing with cyber-physical systems and its application to interconnected infrastructures. This kind of shows some of our program elements. We have a foundations element that does a lot with frameworks or documents that kind of collect the common wisdom. And in the Global Cities Teams Challenge, which we've already heard about some this morning, we have an effort working with cities and communities and entrepreneurs, creating teams to demonstrate value within cities. And then NIST itself is a research organization, so our heart and soul is measurements. And so we do a lot with measurement test beds, and I won't have a chance to talk about that today, but I wanted to mention it. So the Global Cities Teams Challenge was formed with the idea that to promote convergence, we want to get cities talking together, as well as with entrepreneurs and others in academia. And the goal was to establish and demonstrate replicable, scalable, and sustainable models for interoperable standards-based Internet of Things applied in smart cities to demonstrate measurable benefits to these communities. And it also provides a way to look at real-world IoT deployments at scale. So this helps take things from the laboratory up to operating in city-scale platforms. So we ended up creating a dynamic in which we had various cities, and to the point questioned this morning, not just in the United States, but also internationally, because there's a lot of lessons to be learned internationally as well. And by teaming them up with tech innovators in particular areas of interest for cities. We were able to create various teams that focused on these issues, and by cities working together, instead of having a customized solution for that one city, say Chicago, you get the perspectives of multiple cities, and that helps to create a more robust solution that then will have the benefit of being able to better compete with other cities and kind of scale within the marketplace. What we've done in this most recent round is we've looked at clusters of teams. So we've had all sorts of teams participating. Many of them have been focused on transportation, for example. So this last round, we've tried to get all of the different teams in transportation to think about what would it be to have a common blueprint or a super cluster in transportation, or in energy and water or public safety. I should give a shout out to Brenda, who was so wonderful in advertising our Global Cities Teams Challenge this morning with the Fairfax and the first responders example that she gave. And so these are the different areas that we've done. Our partners for this year are listed here. I do want to give a recognition to many of our interagency partners, including the Department of Transportation, the National Science Foundation, and others. And also your host for later in the afternoon, US Ignite, has been a great partner of ours as we've created the Global Cities Teams Challenge. On the right-hand side, we have a listing of some of the different teams. And you can see that it's not just the United States, and it's not just big cities, it's small cities as well as many different international cities. I'm only going to pick a couple projects to mention very, very briefly. There's a whole bunch of different teams, and we've already heard about some of the activities. One that I like in particular is the Columbus, Ohio, who later went on to win the Department of Transportation Smart City Challenge. But they and many other of the finalists in the Department of Transportation's process started off as Global Cities Teams Challenges. And they were kind of tackling the first and last mile issue within transportation. But what I really liked, and this is starting to bridge to the afternoon sessions, many of the transportation projects realized that it wasn't just transportation. It was the transportation connected with other things that cities care about. So I think that's a great dynamic that we can try to encourage to help promote convergence. That way you won't have a transportation solution that's siloed or isolated. It's going to be interactive with the other components of a smart city. Another activity I should mention is locally, Montgomery County, Maryland, put forth its Safe Community Alerting Network scale. And the Global Cities Teams Challenge became a way for it to partner with different organizations around the US and generalize some of the concepts and make it more attractive of a platform. So take a platform approach and help extend some of its functionality. That's another way to promote convergence is through development of useful platforms. And then a third project I would pick is in Virginia. There's an effort led by Newport News on forecasting flooding from storm surges, et cetera. And here they're looking at some introduction of some new water sensors and how this will improve flood forecasting and monitoring. And then the part that I want to emphasize here is that it's not just enough to do some good scientific work and create a better model. They're also interested in how to do new communications with citizens and have an impact on public safety. So through their communications, they've been able to help some communities within their region where they often had to have first responders anytime that there was flooding. By having all sorts of messaging tools, et cetera, that they've been developing, they've been able to reduce the number of first responders that were needed just for the routine kind of flooding things, and they can be then deployed where emergencies occurred. So I think that's another good use of the idea of getting communities to work together on their common problems. As was mentioned this morning, we're going to have our big expo this year, August 28th and 29th here in Washington, D.C. at the Convention Center. And it's free, so here's the page that you can go to for registering for it. This will give you the opportunity to look at the solutions by over 100 teams, over 400 companies and organizations. And I also mentioned these superclusters, these ideas that we wanted anyone getting started in transportation, for example, or public safety, to be able to gather the wisdom and learn from the experiences of the cities that have gone before them. And by them creating these blueprints, there'll be a way to bring others up to speed quickly. And one of the nice things here is that we've had leads in each of these areas, these superclusters, that have had their own workshops in the various cities across the United States. Sakwu Ri, I should point out at NIST, is the main contact for this activity. We've had a series of expos, including with US Ignite at their Austin, Texas event. They also had helped us with the Washington, D.C. event in 2015. So we're really looking forward to what we'll see this year. I want to transition now. I've talked about engaging the community, NIST working with different cities, et cetera. And by the way, we're not bringing funding to the table per se. We're more trying to organize things and helping others create the teams and be able to kind of lead them to possible and useful solutions. At the same time, I mentioned that we have our own research interests. We do a lot with Internet of Things, cyber-physical systems. And as you look at those at scale within a city environment, one of the things that becomes important is that you're not going to be able to have infrastructure, say your gas infrastructure, your electric infrastructure, your transportation infrastructure. Where smart cities start getting the value of networks is when these different infrastructures can work together, so that you can, for example, solve some of your transportation problems looking at how many cars pass through, et cetera, but have that problem coupled to air quality. So there's different kinds of mixed modeling and optimization that it can occur in a smart city, but it's going to rely on the different infrastructures and services of the smart city being able to work across the board. So obviously there's going to be a strong data component to this, but there's also going to be the more detailed, intimate interconnections of these infrastructures. So what we've tried to do is help provide an intellectual framework for understanding interconnected infrastructures. We've had the Cyber Physical System Public Working Group, which has helped us develop the CPS framework, which is now published as a NIST special publication. This was within the last week or so. And I'm not going to go into the details here, but on the left-hand side, you see these different domains: manufacturing, transportation, et cetera. All these different domains are going to have their concerns about whatever a cyber-physical system is going to end up, how it's going to function and be made. From this morning, one of the things I'm realizing is that there's a strong stakeholder component in community-based, et cetera. Think of all of the different concerns that you are listening to and hearing from your communities. We want the ability to take those concerns and include them in the system engineering process so that they can get addressed earlier rather than later. Because if it's the end of the day and the product's already done, that's not going to give us the opportunity to address the concerns of the communities that are going to be using these IoT solutions. We want the ability to organize these different concerns into what we call aspects. So these are groupings of concerns. And then we want to address them as you're developing the systems and products. And oftentimes it's the combination of concerns. For example, I call out here trustworthiness. It's the concept that instead of just worrying about privacy or security or safety, these all have their own risk management approaches and thoughts around them. It's the intersection of them. It's when security and safety are butting heads, you need to figure out a way to have both satisfied or at least understand how you're going to come to a solution. So that's kind of what's built into our framework. It's an analysis methodology for cyber-physical systems. And then we also know that just doing things at the system level only gets you so far. You have to have the ability to scale up to cities. So using our analysis methodology, we've created the Internet of Things Enabled Smart City International Working Group, or YES City, in which we're trying to distill some of the common architectural features and decisions that have been made by various smart cities in their architectures, and to identify pivotal points of interoperability, which in essence are the same technical choices that they've made, but they may not have the same architectures. But they may have, for example, done APIs a similar way or done a similar kind of security. By letting us analyze these different solutions in smart cities according to a common template, we'll be able to learn things. And then we'll be able to lay the technology side by side so that we can see where they've made similar choices to address the different concerns that we have listed in our framework. And then this will give you the opportunity to go, oh, this particular technology is treated security this way. This other technology is treated it slightly different. You hold them next to each other and you can start making the decisions on how best to link them and where to take advantage of where they've made similar technology choices. So with that, I'll stop and we can go on to a great panel discussion, or if you'd like me to answer any questions, I'm happy to do that as well. Thank you.
All right, so thank you very much. And really, the sort of transition that Dave has helped us make here is going to very much serve as sort of a great guide to how we're going to structure the rest of the afternoon. And so the transition from how we take input from the community and how we use data as a driving force to realize the changes that the community wants, and then how we leverage that into very specific cyber-physical systems and specific implementations of technologies and processes and smart processing of data, and then how those processes within their application sectors touch each other, and how data touches agriculture, touches transportation and energy and water. And so what we have for you this afternoon is a series of 4 experts from maybe specific application sectors or area where those sectors meet. And we're going to talk about how smart technology plays a role in those sectors and helps make those specific sectors smart. And then how we can take a step back and look at the system of all of these different infrastructures and all of these different application sectors and really coordinate from a very bottom-up but also top-down approach in a way that improves efficiency across all sectors. And so, to begin with, we're going to have Tim Kuehlhorn giving a talk about kind of bridging a little bit of the rural and urban divide with agriculture, and really some of what we talked about in the morning, and how do we engage rural stakeholders, and what kinds of technologies can we bring from outside the city and improve processes that exist in broader communities than just the urban setting. And so, a little background on Tim. Tim is an alumnus of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, which is where I am also an alumnus. And actually, purely by accident, we've assembled quite a University of Illinois heavy panel because we have yet another University of Illinois alumni here. I swear that was I'm not just here to promote the University of Illinois' public profile, but purely by accident. And so Tim's going to talk about his company, Agrable, where he is a co-founder and chief technology officer, where he mostly deals with technical design and architectures of the Morning Farm Report, which is a data platform. And to my knowledge, he's going to talk a little bit about their ongoing work with the use of drone surveillance for crops. So let's give a big round of applause for Tim.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tim Kuehlhorn, co-founder and CTO of Agrable. We're an agriculture, data science, and predictive analytics company based in Champaign, Illinois, at the Research Park of University of Illinois. And seeing all the talks this morning, I'm coming from kind of an entrepreneurial and industry background, but I really see a lot of similarities with all the challenges that we're talking about that we're facing. Basically, like the programs in education and safety, and but yeah, because really it's about strengthening local communities and building bridges between different stakeholders and finding new commonalities and new synergies between them. One of the first things I learned entering the ag industry, my background is computer science, but I had great co-founders to work with who had ag industry consulting experience, so we were able to really complement each other. And one of the things I learned is that data is everywhere in agriculture. More and more machines like planters and sprayers are constantly collecting data about their operations, as well as taking a lot of data and information as input into how they do their planting or spraying. One example of that is variable rate planting and spraying. Actually, you can by creating a prescription of how chemicals are applied or how seeds are planted in a field, you can much more closely regulate the resources you're using. It makes it makes it cost less for the grower, and as well as creating less runoff, less waste. So ultimately, it's a win-win. And sustainability and the business interests don't. It's not a zero-sum game. They don't have to be opposites. So we built a platform called Morning Farm Report, and the first version of that was really centered around what we can do for the grower. So really grassroots level, I suppose. It allowed them to see their data at a field scale, to take weather data, take the seed varieties they're planting, the crops they're planting, and provide decision support. So we would provide yield predictions. We would provide one of our features we call Tractor Time. It's a 2-week, 14-day prediction of soil moisture. And why that's relevant is that farms are getting bigger and bigger, fields are getting more and more spread out as growers are actually renting fields to farm on, and so there's more logistics required in bringing vehicles to the field. And so if you know up to 14 days ahead of time what days are going to be good for you to drive out and do field operations, then you can plan better. You can schedule around that, and you can save fuel, save energy, save maintenance costs, because you're not having to make as many trips. So as we went into to version 2.0 of our platform, we really started widening that circle. We started to address larger operations and started to build in a lot of what we call enterprise features. And what that was really centered around doing was capturing the relationships in the ag industry, and understand and making the platform, giving the platform the capability to model and understand those relationships. Farmers get a lot of their there are whole retail operations that are set up to supply growers with chemicals, with seed, with fuel even, and so co-op models sometimes form, and it requires the cooperation and collaboration of a lot of different farmers to keep those networks alive and viable, and so by coexisting with those networks, we can then strengthen those relationships. Another thing that this has allowed us to do is really get involved in the sustainability space. Food producers, stores, and ultimately consumers are caring more and more about the sustainability of the products that they buy. But the challenge there is that the store where they're buying the product is almost certainly not the producer of the product, nor the grower of the produce that goes into it. And so there's a long sort of chain of causality that needs to be established to say this corn went into this chip that this person is buying off the shelf. And so that's a big something that we've been putting a lot of effort into in connecting those growers with those food industry partners, as well as with the authorities on sustainability. And so one of our features is Field Story. Field Story is essentially a timeline of the field operations. It's both an input to our data models, our yield prediction, our growth models, our crop health models, as well as an input to a sustainability consortium's calculator, where they can rate the grower, they can rate the field on its sustainability performance. And so rather than having to enter that data each time the grower needs to validate their progress, having a centralized data store for that allows that progress to be better tracked over time, and then ultimately aggregated to the decision makers and the stakeholders, and really get to the consumer at the end, so the consumer is making an informed decision about the sustainability of the products they're buying. So as we looked at our platform, as we evolved it from something that really kind of looked at each grower as a single entity in a vacuum, and started to build these networks, build these connections, we realized that we also had to build these systems of trust. And and I really like that the conversation revolving around trust and data privacy is so prevalent in people's minds, because without understanding the motivations of different stakeholders and balancing those needs, then you won't really create a platform that's viable. We've also been using drones to help gather data and make some of these processes more efficient. And the fact that all the stakeholders are connected in the same platform allows that data to be distributed much more effectively. So an insurance adjuster can go to a field that's been damaged by hail, and they can set a drone down on the field, and it can autonomously take the pictures, take pictures of each sort of cell of the field if you consider it subdivided, and then on their tablet or their phone they can just tap the cells that are damaged, and we can create a calculation that can be used to form an insurance payout. So basically, I mean, to sum up, what I get really excited about is the ability for technical systems to support the communities and networks that have formed naturally. The pre-existing structures develop due to real forces and real intentions, but data can reveal hidden biases and dramatically shorten the feedback cycles that are necessary for improvement. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Tim. So next up, we're going to have Rick Kennedy, who's going to sort of take us a little bit from agriculture and look at some of the areas where agriculture maybe can learn lessons from other sectors or maybe touches other sectors like energy or transportation. And Rick really, when you look at sort of the background or Rick's CV, he's really a guy who's been everywhere. He's been a senior policy advisor at the White House. He's been at the FDA, the World Health Organization, the CDC. I believe you were recently at some international smart grid system in conference in Italy, which, to my understanding, was attended, if I'm not mistaken, by Barack Obama. Is that true? Oh, indeed, it is true. But now he's here speaking to us about his role as the director of neutral science, where he works with partners from US and Italy to develop and use concepts derived from energy smart grids to match local food needs. So please help me give a warm welcome to Rick.
So while we're getting the slides up, I wanted to ask a couple of questions. First of all, has anybody in the audience ever grown lettuce in their house? Okay. How many people have used a CSA? All right. How many people don't know what a CSA is? Well, so, and this is going to my first slide. So a CSA is a community-supported agriculture, and it's a way of connecting local farmers to local consumers, right? It's a way of getting the farmers' support and getting fresh food to consumers in the community. Am I going to have to stand over here to be in the microphone, or no? No. Can you all hear me fine? Yes. Okay. Very good. It's a way of connecting farmers. So you're supporting the farmers, and you're also providing fresh food to individuals in the community. I tried both of these things, growing lettuce in my basement. My kids called it basement lettuce, and it was from their toxicologist father, so they didn't touch it. Right? We tried the CSA. The CSA was both funny and very wasteful in the sense that you would get a bag full of things, and I didn't know what a sunchoke was. And I saw it in the bottom of the bag, and I didn't want to eat it. Anyway, the point is, these experiences that I tried to do as a way of trying to understand the supply and demand of fresh food in communities taught me a few things. One is that there's a lot of waste. There's a lot of arcane practices that happen in order to connect those two worlds, the farming community and the consuming community. There's a lot of knowledge. There's a steep learning curve, in fact, in order to get into those things. So I was advising the Italian National Research Council on a project of introducing technology into the food supply and creating diverse, adaptable food supplies. And one of the concepts we came up with was this idea of matching, actually using the insight from smart grids for energy and applying that to nutrition. So taking the concepts, and I have to admit that I don't fully understand what a smart grid for energy really is. I mean, if you try to get a YouTube explanation of this, you can quickly get lost in what one really is. But doing it for food, the general concept was that we wanted to be able to better connect consumer demand with production capacity, both in timing, varieties, locations, and so on. And if we did this, what kind of insight could we gain, and how could we use that in order to improve nutrition? That was the generalized idea. So think about it in terms of increasing the utility of local production capacity, right? Local farms being able to provide local consumers. How do we connect those two, right? Similar concept to the smart grid for energy. Thinking about where nutrition supply lines have broken down. Wasted fruit in an orchard not getting to a place in an inner city where it's needed. Think about different ways of getting food to individuals. This is, I think it's out of Chicago, in fact, and there's other ways of doing this that have come up in other cities, where actually driving the food to locations is a way of fixing the supply lines, similar to increasing the efficiency of transmission for power lines. In another way, balancing across brownouts versus oversupply regions, so food deserts, in some of our most progressive cities, sit right next to places where there's surplus in food. I'm not saying that you have to take the surplus food and put it into the places where it's needed, but I'm saying that there's viable markets in places next to places where those markets aren't as efficient, aren't as well used. So in what way can we take this systematic evaluation of supply and demand, gain insight, and increase the availability of foods to those places where it's needed the most? And the thing is, we have fairly exceptional, fairly tremendous technologies right now in order to do some of this work of connecting things from A to B. We just heard a great talk that shows a lot of that potential. So, even looking at old technologies like canning, applying that more efficiently, agroponics, or rather hydroponics, verging into aeroponics, verging into, analysis technologies to understand the nutritional value, and verging into labeling technologies, telling us when foods are available and fresh, and information technologies about where it is that the demand exists and how we can connect geographically the demand and the supply together. These technologies are out there right now. They're not being connected very well. If we take a systematic approach to applying these technologies, perhaps we can find insights on how to make it work better. It's not that difficult, right? I mean, this is a funny thing. I mean, grandma had short supply chains and she knew how to do stuff, right? But in fact, these days, with the increased availability of technologies, the better technologies we have right now, applying those back to the inner city, applying those back to places where food shortages occur right now, it may be the right time to do that. And in fact, there's capacity in inner cities, capacity in those food desert areas that can be utilized for this. Think of vertical agriculture. Think of entrepreneurs that would like to fill those gaps in those places. Okay, this is either the time where everybody's having a caffeine crash or a sugar crash, and so I just want to make sure that I'm trying to relate this to you and not just speak at you. So please let me know if I'm going way off target. Okay. So there's lots of innovators out there trying to fill these gaps, right? Ranging from ways of evaluating food intake, what the needs are in individuals, to IKEA providing hydroponics right now, to entrepreneurs out there that are trying to figure out how to fill this gap in providing nutrition to the populations that need it the most, repurposing ugly fruit, finding ways of developing uses for the wasted food. There's lots of technologies out there that are trying to do this, that are trying to fit this together. However, they're not connected together. They're not in those places where they're needed the most. They're not in those places where we can, get the most benefit out of them. If we look at this in a systematic way, perhaps we can get that technology, get those connections together, make the connections happen, understand the flow of nutrition through systems, and make it more available more widely. So the idea here is not to throw technology and throw value systems at people and say, okay, here's the best thing, here's the experts. The idea is to try to extend the boundaries of where active markets are happening into places where the food deserts are, or into places where the food is needed. Lower the costs, make it more available more widely. We're not alone in trying to get urban agriculture out there. We're not alone in trying to create better systems. There's lots of them out there. There's international efforts, there's national efforts. One of the more interesting ones, I don't know if anybody here has run into this incredible edible Todmorden. It's a city in the UK where basically you grow things in the sidewalks as you walk around. You pick a vegetable over here, you eat it. It's everybody everywhere. It's very interesting. But there's lots of efforts out there. And the point is, I'm not trying to advocate that we thrust experts into these situations or change them. What I'm trying to say is that we can create systems where we can help them do better. So we can provide informatics and infrastructure, potentially, to help drive down the cost of doing business so that we can extend the places where markets thrive, so that we can enable entrepreneurs to provide these resources where they're most needed. I think I'll go through this quickly because I'm almost out of time, but the point is that, I'll get 2 minutes, okay. Are we really ready for a shift to more local nutrition systems, more local food systems? And I want to throw this cautionary tale out there because it's not just a simple matter of trying to connect the dots. We're at this place where we have longer food chains because of good reasons, right? We had refrigerated cars, we had higher production efficiencies that were enabled by that. We had ways of developing nutrition and getting it more cheaply to more people. These are good things. We had ways of getting that nutrition, and I'm not putting this up there as a way of saying, oh, this is horrible. I'm thinking, this is a way of getting more nutrition more efficiently to people. But the point is that because of the way that agriculture, because of the way that food processing has evolved over the last 100 years, regulations are typically interstate-based or typically internation-based. They're based on large processing facilities. There's going to be changes that happen in regulatory policy, in economics that happen because of this shift to smaller food systems. And these things have effects. I don't know if you've followed the share economy evaluations, but this idea that Uber drivers are sleeping in their cars overnight presents an occupational hazard challenge that we haven't recognized before. How do we do epidemiology in that population? As we're moving towards shorter food chains and more of a share economy, how is it we understand those transitions in a way that make it safe by design? And there's new things to try out. Blockchain, this is something Walmart is just coming out as advocating, for example, as a way of keeping track of things like your farm, I'm sorry, what was it? The field story. Field story, exactly. All right, so building urban food systems can be very complex. It should be very complex. We have a lot to do in order to make this happen in an efficient way. The point of this complicated diagram is that there is a lot of things that need to happen independently, but also in parallel. One of the most important things, and referring to what was happening this morning, is that we need to be specific to the communities. We need to involve the communities. Thrusting experts into communities is not the way to make it happen. But there's a lot to get done here. And there's my bell. So we're proposing a two-step process in the project that I'm trying to get together. It's a fledgling group. We have about 9 partners now that I'll show in the last slide, international, some very good partners. The first step is to actually convene people in locations where this is needed. Get the local experts, the technology experts, the policy experts together, get them together, try to identify where we can make progress. The second step is to actually coordinate research. And these things should be interactive and in ways that enrich each other, learning from the communities, learning from the research community. Benefits, I don't have to say very much about benefits to this population because you all know the advantages of connecting and increasing the availability of these foods and the interconnection of the networks. But I think we can create new technology markets. I think we can create resilience, community resilience, by keeping local value, by keeping food value local, and by connecting local entrepreneurs and enabling them to do this. So we have 9 partners, as I said, happy to share the information. We have 2 that just added, which are the Max Rubner Institute in Germany and Global Good in Seattle. It's an international group. And as you can probably tell from my graphics, I need you because I'm really bad at it. And I need help with a lot of the things that we're going to be able to do through this. So thank you very much.
One question. How wide do you envision the systems to be? How big? Obviously, as you go big, you get.
Yeah, I think the system is, I think this is almost fractal in the sense of its growth potential, but there's a minimum mass, a minimum number of people that would have to have community connectedness in order to make something like this work. I don't know what that minimum is, but it's clearly not me and my family because, anyway, a lot of food gets wasted at my house.
I just envision there's also a point where it's too big too as well, right? Or not?
I think so, but I think it's also very community specific. So the size of it is going to relate to what the neighborhood's like and what the larger community's like and how many available resources are there. So again, I don't want to create the systems. I want to enable people to go out there and have that leave behind of there's partnerships, there's connectedness, there's understanding about the sharing of information that helps them establish greater food supply. Thank you.
So thank you so much for a great introduction to the ways that different sectors and systems can find interconnectedness in the lessons that we can learn from maybe areas that may not immediately seem related, like how we can treat streams of energy and streams of electricity and how we can apply those lessons in something like food supply chains. And that's actually a great transition to our next guest, Professor David Slutsky, who, when you look at his background, he's also a guy who's kind of been everywhere. He's worked with the federal government, he's held elected office, he's an entrepreneur, and I suppose he's here, I guess in his capacity as a professor and also as an entrepreneur. His work has served at the intersection of transportation and energy, and more specifically, he looks at understanding the interaction between electric vehicles and the power grid and some of the ways that we can improve efficiency in a number of systems by targeting that junction. And so please help me give a warm welcome to Professor David Slutsky.
Hello, nice to meet you guys. I'm a college professor, among other things. I'm used to walking around and going up the aisles, but I don't think the mic will pick that up, so I'm just going to have to sit here or stand here. But while I teach in an engineering school, I'm actually trained as a philosopher, so I might sound a little philosophical to you today, but I can't help that. So let's start with the premise. Well, let me tell you how I got into this interconnection between the electric power grid and electric vehicles. I started sitting around thinking, that's what philosophers do. And I was considering the question of the unsustainable paradigm of a consumptive society. You know, we go out and extract natural resources from the ground and we transport them to a factory, we superimpose labor and some processes on those raw materials, and out comes a product. That product goes to the market, hopefully in response to somebody wanting some utility value that product offers. And then they buy it, they have it, they extract that utility value from it, and then they kind of lost interest in it. Either, pink shoes are no longer in fashion, so let's get rid of those and replace them with red shoes, or maybe the thing just wore out because it wasn't that well made. Whatever reason, natural resources end up in the landfill most of the time, and that's obviously a suboptimal paradigm. I like to think of things much more in the realm of reservoir of uses. It would be great if we could find multiple uses for things, particularly big things that consume a lot of natural resources, like, for example, a car. Wouldn't that be interesting? So I started thinking about how do I interact with the automobile industry to try and stimulate some kind of thinking around reservoir of uses. Well, cars are usable for pretty much one thing as we traditionally view them, and that's for transportation, logistics. And then I started thinking about, well, electric vehicles. I want to get everybody to get into an electric vehicle. I've been driving EVs for over 10 years. I love them. How do I get everybody else to get into electric vehicles and have those electric vehicles provide multiple utility values to different users? So I looked at the problem of, well, why aren't we all driving electric vehicles anyway? There's two reasons. One, there's a perception that electric vehicles don't have sufficient range to address most people's logistics requirements. That's a bogus assumption, but that's how we emotionally react to cars when electric vehicles were first brought into the market. This year, with the Tesla 3 out on the market as of yesterday, and the Chevy Bolt has been out for months, and roughly this September, the Nissan Leaf 2018 model will be out there. Each of these vehicles get over 200 miles, and their cost is about in the mid-range of vehicles. So the idea of range being an obstacle to scale adoption of electric vehicles is probably going to disappear pretty quickly. The other reason why electric vehicles aren't as readily adopted as they could have been is because they're more expensive. How do you overcome that? Well, that's where the thing as a reservoir of uses starts to get interesting. Because if you have an electric vehicle and you use it, you extract that utility function of mobility, but then you leave it parked most of the time. What if it could be earning money while it's parked? Hold that thought. Let's shift over to the power grid. So what's the power grid? The power grid is this big, dynamic, fascinating system I knew very little about 8 years ago, and I still don't know much about it, but it's amazing. Power grid has these big power generating facilities, mostly nuke and coal at this point in this country. And they're turning big turbines, pushing electrons out dynamically into a system of distribution and consumption. Well, it would be nice, wouldn't it, if most of those electrons were generated from renewable sources. That would be a more sustainable paradigm. Why isn't that happening? It turns out that wind and solar are a little bit cheaper right now than coal and nuke, depending upon the economics, for the generation of the electrons themselves. The problem is the grid wasn't designed with enormous energy storage. In fact, it almost had no energy storage designed into it because it wasn't necessary. So with the absence of energy storage, we can't really go to renewables because when the wind's blowing, the sun's shining, that's when the electrons are generated. Users don't necessarily need them at those times. So energy storage obviously is the huge transition that the grid has to make. Wait a minute. We've got those vehicles over there, those electric vehicles. Could those supply the energy storage function? There's a scholarly article written by Willett Kempton at University of Delaware that has this sentence that knocked me off my chair when I read it. He said, roughly speaking, if you took a quarter of the vehicles on the roads of America today and you made them electric, the batteries in those vehicles would have energy storage capacity roughly equal to the entire output of the U.S. power grid. That's where the energy storage can come from. Right now, there are people playing around the edges. They're putting a whole bunch of batteries in a building, and those batteries serve one purpose, and that's to provide energy storage to the grid. So they have a significant capital expenditure associated with that one utility function. My batteries are kind of free because they're paid for by the logistics duty cycle of the vehicle. This is starting to get interesting. So I dug a little deeper, and I came to discover an idea called vehicle-to-grid. And vehicle-to-grid is basically the technology that enables electric vehicles to provide different service values to basically to the building, to the utility, and to the grid operators. So I started a company called Fermata Energy about 6 or 7 years ago, and that's what Fermata Energy does, is it is basically commercializing vehicle-to-grid technology. So how does that work? Well, there's a number of things that people think you would want to use electric vehicle for, like energy arbitrage. Buy electrons at night where they're cheap and then dump it back on the grid in the afternoon when they're more valuable. You don't make enough money to make it make sense. We look pretty deeply, and there are a series of what we call monetization pathways that are very applicable to electric vehicles. And we did our first one, we did a demonstration project in Danville, Virginia. I know all of you from Illinois might have thought I was going to say Danville, Illinois as soon as I said Danville. I spent 20 years in Chicago, so I've been there. U of I is a great place. So we have a demonstration project in Danville where we deployed 4 Nissan Leafs. We leased them out to 3 of them go to the city of Danville, and a 4th one goes to Severn Trent, which is the contractor that runs their wastewater treatment facility. Those vehicles are driven by the fleet customers Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And then we have a program where they can sign it out for odd hours if they give us some lead time. And their only other obligation is to plug them in when they're done. We installed 4 30 kW bidirectional DC fast chargers. It's basically just a really fast charger that's off the vehicle. It's next to the vehicle. And so our chargers are able to bring the batteries back about 80% of their state of charge in 15 minutes if they were completely drained. So they're really fast chargers. We had 4 of them because the minimum increment we could bid into this first market that we wanted to do business with was 100 kilowatts. And so we needed to be able to aggregate 4 vehicles. So how do you do vehicle to grid? Well, you need an electric vehicle that's capable of bidirectional current flow, not just drawing electrons and then burning them up, but being able to draw them or send them back at your whim. Second thing you need is a bidirectional, we think best is DC fast charger, but you need to have charging capability that can move those electrons back and forth. And then, very importantly, you need to have software that enables the interoperability between the vehicle and its duty cycle managers and the building where the charger is and the charger and the utility and the grid. So you need to have pretty sophisticated software to be able to operate this system. So we got a kind of we call it our version 0.1 because it's not really as robust as 1.0 would be. But our software version 0.1 enabled these 4 vehicles when they were plugged in to participate in a market in the PJMs. Anybody here ever heard of the PJM? Not too many. PJM is the grid sector that operates in the Mid-Atlantic, including where we're sitting right now. I'm standing here sitting, I know. So the PJM is one of about 10 grid regions in the United States. Some are regulated, some are less regulated. They have different flavors and colors, but they're in the aggregate kind of the power grid. They're the layer of operations above individual utilities. They are what make it possible for a utility who goes, oh, my nuke plant just went down and I had to drop it and I don't have enough electrons. I got to get them from somewhere quick. So they go up to the grid and get them from somebody else in that grid network. So the PJM has a market called the frequency regulation market. Does anybody know what it does? It regulates frequency. The grid pushes out electrons at 60 hertz. What that means is, for it to stay at 60 hertz, there has to be a balance, an equilibrium between the electrons being generated and pushed out of the grid and the consumption of electrons. You know that people, over the course of a year, on the hot summer days, the grid is really cranking and all those power plants are running, and there's a lot of electrons moving. And then, maybe in the fall it drops down a little bit, and then it goes up. They can manage that by turning equipment up and down in response to those anticipated changes. There's another sine curve daily. 4 in the afternoon, it gets to be pretty high, the use of electrons. 4 in the morning, not so much. They can manage that by cranking up the nuke plant or telling the coal plant to chill out a little bit. But there's another sine curve that sits on top of the demand curve that controls frequency, and that's every couple seconds. Imagine being the grid operator, and he's like, 4,000 customers just turned off their heating, ventilating, and air conditioning. We better crank down the nuke plant or we're going to have extra electrons spitting out. And then, cancel that order because 3,000 customers just turned theirs on, so never mind. I mean, they can't do that practically because these power plants, they're dynamic, but they can't respond that quickly. So they created a market called the frequency regulation market. And every 2 seconds, PJM sends out a signal to participating projects. And those project participants react to the signal. And the signal will be, give us electrons or take them back. That's it. and they balance it every 15 minutes. It has to more or less zero out. It's a very complicated and not ideally set up market, and it's been evolving, but it's there. It's been around for years, and bless their hearts, you can make money doing it. So our 4 Leafs in Danville with our 4 chargers are actually on an ongoing basis, other than Monday through Friday to 9 to 5. They are participating. Have I run out of time? I see you over there.
I'll give you one.
All right, thank you. So I love to talk about it. I'm sorry, I go on all day. So frequency regulation, we are participating in that market, and a typical vehicle down in Danville is averaging about $1,500 per year of money coming in. There are a series of revenue streams, a series of services that we can provide with this vehicle-to-grid technology to the utility, to the building owner, and to the grid, each of which are monetizable. We can make money from them, such that they make the cost of owning an electric vehicle less than an internal combustion engine vehicle. So this technology is likely to disrupt the auto industry by making electric vehicles the better deal, and hopefully will also disrupt the grid by providing the massive energy storage needed to transition to renewables more quickly. And I'm done, sorry. Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions? Off the hook. Oh, go ahead.
How many cars can do that bidirectional? Just the Leaf?
The Teslas all do. The Leaf, since 2012, I believe, it's either 12 or 13, has been able to do it. The Bolt does not. They won't, they say, but they'll be persuaded by market conditions. And I think most of the newer generation vehicles, the first out of the shop for big OEMs, are all going to be bidirectionally endowed. The Leaf, when you buy it, isn't capable of it. You have to go to the dealer and get a firmware upgrade that takes 5 minutes. But they're capable of doing it, and I think you're going to see it becoming. We hope to start scaling next year. It should be interesting. Any other questions? Great, thank you.
All right, thank you so much, David. So that is a great segue into our final speaker, Daniel Morgan, who sits more on the transportation side of things. Although Daniel himself also has a pretty varied background, with a background in management consulting, really interacting with a wide variety of stakeholders. But he's here to serve on this panel in his capacity as the first Chief Data Officer for the U.S. Department of Transportation. So, and also, as I mentioned earlier, perhaps most importantly, a University of Illinois alumnus. Thank you so much.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about our Smart City Challenge, which was mentioned a couple of times earlier and probably talked about this morning, but also some of the things that we're starting to see from some of our other connected vehicle deployments and what this really means for transportation. I'll note that everybody prior to me talked about transportation today. Transportation is not just traffic. It is about moving things. It is about moving people. It's about connecting people to jobs, education, healthcare, all sorts of activities that they do in a place. The way we design place impacts the way it is used and impacts the technology solutions that we're going to deploy in those communities. So when we talk about what the Smart City Challenge was about, it was about asking cities themselves, rather than sort of being a weird top-down federal government saying this is what you need. We said, hey, let's go out to mid-sized cities around the United States and ask them how they would use intelligent transportation systems and other advanced sensor technologies to make their communities better. And we got some 70 or so applications, and because as part of my other day job, I'm the open government guy, all of those applications are up there and available at transportation.gov/smartcity, so you can see what those cities were trying to do for their communities. When we put out the Smart City Challenge, we tried to put together a number of vision elements. One of the more interesting ones to talk about is user-focused mobility services and choices. So transportation is big on the systems engineering lifecycle. So how many of you are from an engineering school? right? We're all supposed to begin with user needs in the systems engineering lifecycle and then engage in a very deliberate, V-shaped, painful process. This doesn't work in the digital transportation world. We're learning that this digital transportation thing, where we have to do some physical infrastructure deployment, but also layer information technology on top of it and build it back together, requires some changes to the way we think about systems engineering. It requires some agility. But also, we're not going to send a crew out there to change the sensor configuration every day. We don't have enough humans to do that. So we need to think smart about how to get just enough in front of the actual build and then be able to configure it dynamically after it's out there in the wild. And then a bird will build a nest on top of our camera and we won't be able to count cars anymore. But we tried. So these are all the cities that responded. There were 7 finalists. They were Portland, Pittsburgh, San Francisco, Denver, Austin, Kansas City, and the winner was Columbus. We actually mined all of those 7 finalist applications, and because my job is the open government guy, you can see the themes that were running through all of these applications with an open data set that's linked here. I won't ask you to take a picture of it. I believe these slides will be posted at the end. So with that, because I'm the chief data officer, I have to do a plug for what we mean when we're talking about data. And this gets back to that convergence of information technology and operational technology, right? When we talk about data, we mean agile and open because it has to be able to be dynamic. It needs to be modular, service-oriented. We're trying to generate data and put it to work for people's lives. We're trying to do, we call it privacy-positive design, as opposed to trying to assure privacy. And we talk about using commodity solutions as much as possible, and really modern technology stacks are a big deal. But this transition to modern technology stacks, when cities have a hard enough time managing their existing infrastructure, is going to be extremely difficult. A bunch of research is needed into what the next generation city government needs to look like, how we handle the transition of management structures from where we are today to what it needs to be in a smart community. As I was talking about, transportation is more than just traffic. We have a bunch of connected vehicle pilots going on in Wyoming. They're trying to understand weather-related incidents on the Interstate 80 corridor so that they can get better information to commercial vehicle operators so they can operate safely. Because weather conditions get very dynamic in mountain passes. They can change on a dime. In New York City, right, you're not in traffic, you are traffic. They're trying to work on doing a large-scale vehicle-to-vehicle deployment to work on some safety issues on some high-accident arterials in Manhattan and in Brooklyn. And then in Tampa, they're working on the highway as well. One of the more important things that we're starting to see is this transition of these intelligent transportation systems technologies from the highway into the urban or even rural environment to try to make them safer and more efficient. The Smart City demonstration is about connectivity, automation, and intelligent sensor-based infrastructure all around trying to connect citizens, to use analytics to help them get better services, to design services that are better tailored to people's needs, and also to talk about some cross-sector benefits. Our big focus was on the grid, so I won't repeat some of the things that we talked about, but I think there's still work to be done to understand these cross-sector benefits, especially in the US. Some of the research that I was doing in advance of working on this solicitation, some of the best stuff I saw was coming from India about cross-sector benefits in IoT applications. So what does Smart Columbus look like? Smart Columbus thought about their city as a series of districts. A city is not a unified lump, right? It's a series of communities, places that are designed. There's a residential district, and people go from that residential district to go work in the commercial district and sit in an office or those kinds of things. Or they might go downtown to work downtown and shop and also go to some football games. Columbus has a logistics park as well. They also have a dedicated freight airport. And so they have an interesting sort of set of communities. What's interesting is while there's a series of sort of unified technology concepts, they're packaged differently in each of these places to get the outcome that they want for the people who live there. So let's get real about numbers, right? So we could talk about 4 leaves. The U.S. Department of Transportation put $40 million into the Smart City Challenge. So this is how many things are going to start getting deployed in Smart Columbus as they work through their systems engineering concept. When we're talking about data, it's not just about data from the transportation sector. I mentioned things like weather, or there's crowdsourcing data, or there's data that connects human services to transportation services. And these kinds of connections start to do things that will help us understand how to make the system work better. When we're talking about human services, transit looks like not just getting on a bus, but making a plan to get somewhere, being able to pay, whether you're getting an Uber or on transit or whatever, and offering a variety of inclusive mobility options. You know, the way people get around in rural America is a lot like what you're trying to do with car sharing today, right? It's on demand, it's ride sharing. It's been that way for a real long time. People organize around these concepts already. They've just become more urban and more technology enabled. They're not new. Electric vehicle infrastructure, so they're looking at not just end user vehicles, but also fleet vehicles as a way to start piloting some of these kinds of things and build some of these bridges. The utility in Columbus is a public utility, but it's a private entity, and so there's some interesting concepts that are available there. One of the places that they focused on with the Smart Columbus concept was in the residential district is a neighborhood called Linden, where the infant mortality rate is 4 times the national average. There's no OBGYN in that community. And so the residents rely on transit to get to the doctor. If they miss their bus or the bus is late, they miss their appointment. If they miss their appointment, it becomes a giant pain in the butt to reschedule it. If the system was more resilient for the user, then they would be able to dynamically find the next bus that could get them to that appointment. The system at the hospital or at the doctor's office would dynamically reschedule them and would create the safety net that they need, just like you would be able to do, right? And that is the kind of application of technology across sectors that starts to introduce new things. I bet you didn't think I was going to talk about HIPAA when I was talking about transportation, right? This is important. Transportation is more than traffic. When we talk about how we use these technologies, it's about how the system operates for the user. So yeah, we can talk about bus rapid transit and getting dynamic with transit operations. Is anybody in here an anthropologist or an ethnographer? Let's work on that. Okay? Because we have to understand how people will react to these new public options, how they will take advantage of them. They need to be part of these smart city conversations because just because we've built this puzzle of transit. If you love numbers and letters and weird combinations thereof, you could probably get around a city, right? But now when I start making those little maps be dynamic, it's going to be even harder. How are we going to deal with technology acceptance and understandability and legibility of the transportation system? Let's skip ahead a little bit. Parking management. So we talked a lot about logistics. Cities haven't quite figured out what logistics looks like, okay? When we asked about urban freight and logistics, they came back with parking. Because trucks take up space on the street and make a traffic mess, right? So I was in New York this past weekend, and I saw a lot of that, and it was super fun to try to get around. But loading zone and parking management and how we operate the street dynamically is important, right? All that paint on the street is the operating system of that asphalt river, right? If we could dynamically configure it or use it at different ways at different times of day, we might be able to get more productivity out of that. And when we start to think about different types of ways that that pavement is used at different times of day, we might be able to dynamically price it or work together in new and creative ways. And then when the trucks are moving, we can actually start having them talk to each other to dynamically platoon and improve fuel efficiency and safety. And we can give them better routing information so that they don't go under bridges, which we call can openers, because they, yeah. And the other big thing is, while we still have humans operating these things, they do need to rest. And it would be better if they could go to a truck parking area as opposed to the side of the road. At the end of the day, like I said, transportation is about people and the things that they need access to first and foremost. And we have to design the systems engineering lifecycle and the things that we're trying to do to support those things. And so as we think through transportation issues, they are emergency medical services. They are public health. They are food. They are jobs and education. It's all of those things together. And that's how we talk about cross-sector benefits in smart cities. Thanks.
All right, so thank you so much for our 4 speakers. You've done a really good job at highlighting some of the sort of high-level ways that very, or what may seem like very different sectors interact with and inform each other. And maybe that's a good place to start. We've identified a number of these areas sort of across your talks, but maybe we could just get a couple of good examples from each of you. When we consider the systems of agriculture, transportation, energy, water, where are some of these areas where they directly touch each other? Like in the case of, for example, electric vehicles on the grid is a case where transportation and energy directly touch each other. And then what are some areas where solutions or methods of thinking in one sector might inform the way we think about another, like in the case of agriculture and energy?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that I think about is the intersection of agriculture and transportation, because I mean, different crops grow differently in different areas. Some crops are impossible. You're not going to grow oranges in Minnesota or something. I mean, you have to transport goods if you want them to be available. But for goods that are for crops that have larger production areas, by taking into account the transportation, you can better optimize the energy use overall.
I think when we start to look at, the capital investment that's required to build resilience into any of this stuff, we have to look differently at how we might be able to build resilience. Right? The idea of conveyances also being local storage, right? Or much more local sourcing options available. You can use vehicles to deliver food too. It happens today, you might call it Uber Eats, but there's ways for this stuff to happen, right? But that involves looking at our assets differently. And it goes back to my point about some of the ethnography kinds of questions that we have in terms of acceptance, right? So if you're going to use my car differently, right? Like maybe I should have a say in how that's going to work, right? Or if I'm going to use my condo's land a little bit differently, how should that work? These kinds of societal and human questions matter. Almost everything we've talked about is some sort of supply chain or complex system of those kinds of things. The math is relatively simple on how those kinds of things work. When we start to add dynamic storage and just-in-time deliveries and those kinds of things, the math exists there. It's in the management sciences, not necessarily in the engineering.
Sort of an extension of that, we've been pleasantly surprised. We were approached by a number of localities in Florida, and they are very concerned about having resiliency in their emergency response infrastructure, particularly during hurricane season. And so we're exploring the idea of, all right now they've got a bunch of batteries sitting there to back up the power center. What if the vehicles, they had a fleet of leafs, and then when there was an emergency, they made sure the leafs were filled and they were deployed in a thoughtful way such that when the power goes out, there's usually power going to be available in some places, but you can't predict Unlike the batteries, the leaf batteries are in a vehicle. They can be driven to the source of electrons that is alive, and then taken over to the command center, discharged, and then before they're fully discharged, they leave. Another one comes in, they go back and recharge. So they thought that's an interesting public safety application for vehicle to grid. Another one is when you have, there's a low-income housing project in Fort Wayne, Indiana, that the state of Indiana is putting building. And there, poor folks live in there who don't really have transportation options. So the building is going to have about 10 vehicles available for the tenants to sign them out when they need to go to a doctor's appointment or go to the grocery store or what have you. That same project has a microgrid, they've got solar, they've got a lot of kind of cutting-edge energy ideas deployed there, but they're now going to make those vehicles electric and have them participate in grid activities with the building. So there's a lot of system engineering that takes all of these different elements that we're talking about and integrates them in the smart cities context.
Yeah, I would then add to that in the sense that for food systems, the logistics of getting food to the place it needs to get just in time, both has a just in time element and also a resilience element to it. So you need to be able to respond to changing interests, changing needs, changing crop cycles in ways that have resilience. Right? The second aspect I bring up is one of the slides I put up there was a bus that was converted to being a local fresh food store. There's lots of ways you can integrate that into automated reserve capacity systems. Getting the food to where people need it is effectively a problem in terms of both understanding the time and the production, but also understanding the demand.
So it sounds like in a lot of these cases, especially in the areas where there's direct overlap, you're going into a situation where there are a lot of stakeholders that speak very different languages. So if I'm talking to people who are on the vehicle side, or if I'm talking to farmers, or if I'm talking to, these are people from, especially in the case of agriculture, very old industries that have a way of doing things and speak very different languages from the sorts of people you're trying to get them to work with. So how do you go into these areas and convince people to make changes?
Asking them what they need. I think convincing them to make changes, I'm not sure I understand that as a construct. I think asking them what it is they need and how they need to see their world adapting to those needs is maybe a different way of stating what you're saying.
I would suggest that entrepreneurship has a role here, because a lot of times entrepreneurs, they get their forward momentum from responding to the pain points of their constituents that they're responding to. So if there's a rural community that has a need, an entrepreneur might step into that breach more effectively than a government bureaucrat, for example, and figure out what their pain point is, and then develop a market response to it with help from the government, ideally. And that's the whole separate challenge. But I think maybe that's where some of that can take place.
I think the right answer from the federal perspective is that I run away as much as possible. Now, I think what we try to encourage is a values-based conversation and really a discussion of value exchanges, which then generates market kinds of responses, right? Some of these industries are trying to find new markets and ways to add value or build new bridges. And so we can engage in a constructive dialogue about what that looks like and design experiments that actually allow us to measure value, right? Then we're in a good place. One of the things that we've struggled with a lot of these IoT, smart communities kinds of applications is that they're too small scale to learn anything from, right? They're poorly designed experiments. Here at AAAS, people who know how to design experiments, right? So let's advance some science here. But I mean this honestly, right? Like we have to have these ways to discover these new value chains that do exist, right? And we need frameworks that allow us, from a regulatory perspective, whether you're state or local or even federal, to be permissive about those new value chains and then figure out how to make them work.
Yeah, no, I think the common thread is having an understanding and empathy for your stakeholders. If you don't understand why they would engage with your system, they're probably not going to engage
I just add, the idea of the interplay between the government can seed money and they can create metrics, and those are all values that the government provides. Sometimes unintentionally, the government provides obstacles to the emergence of new technology responses to real need. And it comes from the regulatory framework. So having a regulatory infrastructure that's designed to be a little bit more adaptive, a little bit more nimble, give more discretion to the federal officers in actually applying those rules is where entrepreneurship can kind of germinate. And I see with the Smart Columbus project, you guys have opened up an awful lot of flexibility designed into the program, and I think that's partly why you're seeing these new ideas able to achieve, hopefully, scaling, because a lot of these regulatory barriers have been moved off to the side.
Well, and maybe that's a good opportunity to take this in the direction of the relationship between entrepreneurship and the city governments and the federal government. And so I would love to hear any of your thoughts on maybe how are the best ways the federal government can promote entrepreneurial activity, and are there, we always hear about, especially in recent months, about job killing or innovation killing regulations. So is there some truth to that? And are there some ways where the federal government can get out of the way of entrepreneurs in some of these sectors? And what are the ways that the federal government can help spread innovation and seed innovation?
Is critical for establishing a lot of these systems in a term from this morning, a leave behind way. I think it's, in order to have some of these things come from the concept and here's what we think you need to an actual in-place set of connections of food systems and consumers. I mean, it has to have entrepreneurs. We're not going to be able to just throw money at it and make it continue. And so there needs to be that. I think one thing that government tends to, I guess, fail at because it relies too much on commercial interest is that transition. So policies with regard to helping initiate entrepreneurship in functioning systems, I think is a step in that direction, obviously.
Yeah, like I really like the Smart Cities Challenge stuff because not only does it provide a venue for that entrepreneurial creativity to flourish, it provides the data resources. It prioritizes, okay, we're going to aggregate all the data, we're going to make it available to people to use, to hackathon on, to build businesses around. And really, I mean, I see entrepreneurship as a culture. It's a cultural mindset. And so it is a lot about getting out of the way of that mindset and allowing it to exist, but it definitely there are definitely things that help it thrive. And access to data, access to things like that, really fast track that.
There's a challenge, though, for the federal government now. On the one hand, there's this pressure on the federal government to make as much information available to people, but then there's the contrary pressure, in the day of, paranoia about terrorism and so forth. So we've got to protect all of our data. We've got to protect our critical infrastructure and the data that underlies the operations of that infrastructure. So sometimes the government's in a tough spot because you've been kind to provide us information on all the unsuccessful applicants because there's value in that. There's information that the government can provide without consequence, and they do. But when the information that is needed for entrepreneurs to leverage R&D into commercial and scalable productive outcomes, sometimes the biggest obstacle is access to the underlying data to be able to operate off of. And the government is in a pickle there, and I don't know exactly how you solve it, but being sensitive to it is probably a step.
And that brings up topics like privacy and security, and I'm not going to pretend those questions are even close to being answered. But in some way, to whatever extent that conversation can be driven forward, people are always going to be operating at the fringes, doing new things, using data in new ways that have never been conceived. But having an agility, having a nimbleness to adapt to that in a way that doesn't maybe destroy any opportunity to advance, I think it's a tightrope balancing act.
Yeah, I think first I would say governments at all times, right? There's a mess of governments, right? I actually think counties are probably where a lot of the innovation opportunity exists, and they are not generally thought of as a unit of government at all. And they have a lot of power, right? You go look at Charlotte. Charlotte city government is powerful, but Mecklenburg County is more powerful and has more money, right? And North Carolina state government has lots of little cities, right? So think about that for a second. And think about where the actual leverage is in the system. That's one thing. And so we need to think at the federal level. As the U.S. Department of Transportation, we always work with the states. It's the next layer down in the bureaucracy, and so that's what works. Like there's a hierarchy. But the actions at the county. The second piece of this is every state has a different regulatory regime as it relates to certain things like privacy. I'll go to a non-smart cities example. Just a crash data. Every state has different liability laws. And so some states don't want to release their crash data because they open themselves up to lawsuits. Or they have different privacy laws and they don't disclose enough information about crashes for you to make any meaningful investments in invested infrastructure. It has nothing to do with the federal government. All I can do is make a recommendation for how some of these things can work. There's also misconceptions about some of our regulatory requirements. There's guidance that we have on systems engineering, but we didn't say that we were opposed to agile systems engineering lifecycles. We also never actively embraced them. And so when you are a state government or a city government who's used to being sued by a community for making transportation infrastructure decisions that aren't by the book, not having a clear option available to you is just simply an interpretation. I can write an interpretation memo like that. We need to be able to have a dialogue amongst the entrepreneur community and the government community to be able to actually talk about these things. Because there's assumptions on both sides that actually create more friction. And all it takes is a one-page memo saying, of course you can use the agile systems engineering lifecycle. Have fun. Right? And then we're done.
Yeah, that's a very interesting way of looking at it, and I think actually this is the first time we've mentioned counties at all today. But it certainly is a very powerful leverage point for a lot of these programs that exists just in the in-between space of cities and states themselves. And I wonder, sort of getting a little bit more local than that, but kind of keeping with the entrepreneurial discussion, is there a way that not just the federal government, but also counties or cities or universities can help the entrepreneurial community and spur innovation and help seed some of those ideas, or help translate the research that happens at that level into something that into an actual private enterprise?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that Agrible has would not be where it is if not for the support of its community, the support of the university, and we came out of the University of Illinois incubator, Enterprise Works, and so definitely, and then there are various programs and small business advice, organizations for small business, like small business councils and whatnot, and so I think a lot of those things are happening. I think and I've noticed that incubators are becoming more and more common in more and more towns and cities, and it's becoming recognized as something that is vital to the growth and to the development of these municipalities. And so I think a lot of it's happening. I think keeping the conversation going and keeping and advancing those things is what's going to drive that progress.
Just a quick thought for those of you who are working in the federal government. If my company wanted to get access to federal money for supporting what we do, it would be on the R&D side. We end up getting no money from the feds, but we've gotten $2 million from the state of Virginia, from the Virginia Tobacco Commission R&D program. And what they have done is they've invested in the development of our bidirectional DC fast charger technology, but it isn't just in the R&D side. It transitions up into the commercialization phase. And a lot of times there's a bifurcation of the funding from the feds. They're on the R&D side, good luck on the private sector funding the commercialization. But the state was a little more nimble and able to make a program that served both of those masters. And I think in our case it's been really helpful. So that may be a way in which the the federal government could start thinking about how their programs are applied such that they go that next stage in development of technology.
Some of the things that we looked at and we have not been able to successfully structure quite yet is thinking about that sort of growth chain, right? And I am not an R&D guy, so you're just going to have to bear with me. But I understand that there's a gap, right, from, let's say, your SBIR concept up into commercialization that private sector is not going to fill. And if we were smart about how we could structure some cross-agency collaboration, we could partner, we could acquire an accelerator through venture capitalist or something like that, and sort of fill that gap a different way if your stuff is commercially viable. Federal government doesn't need to pick that, right? There are alternative acquisition methods that are available to us and partnership methods that are available to us that can help sort of ameliorate that problem. But I think we need to be creative in the federal government, and we need good partners to help us see different sort of growth patterns for some of these technologies.
I'm having trouble thinking of like the level of organization at which we should start asking this question. Thinking of county or city or state or government or international organization sort of confines you to a level of analysis that I don't know, at least in my mind, really works. And you want to take the question on how to actually ask you, what is the unit we're looking at? What is the size we're looking at? It's a local city council or something. It's a growers association, or it's organizations that have information to share, and then they integrate and organize and share with other levels. And assigning a particular level of entry, it makes it difficult, at least to think through the situation I'm trying to see. I think you instead need to think, what is your minimum organizational unit, and how does it relate to other organizational units, which includes cities and counties.
There's a lot of really interesting policy research just coming out of the panel.
Someone's taking notes, I promise. So I would like to circle back around to something that was mentioned earlier that was sort of, I think, addressed as something that sometimes is a little scary to address because it can frighten the people that you're trying to get to work with you. And that's as we're increasing the connectivity of a lot of these systems, while we're expanding the power of those systems, we're also possibly expanding the risks of those systems, and we're making them more vulnerable in the same way, at the same time as making them more powerful. And this can sometimes be a delicate thing to address because we don't have a lot of the answers right now to that. But are there ways to approach thinking about these systems that maybe bakes in security from the beginning and bakes in privacy from the beginning? Or how do I assuage the concerns, privacy and security concerns in these systems?
I can take a crack at it from a philosopher's point. So right now, the government has a bias in protecting the privacy, protecting the security of its systems because the default is unimaginable. So there's, I think, a general tendency to stifle access to information because of the perception that it's readily available. What would be interesting is that the federal government sort of evolved in its thinking so that they made all sorts of information available to stimulate entrepreneurial expressions of that information, but they achieved their security through other means, getting more effective with gas, providing the kinds of insulation down into the system to protect the infrastructure, rather than just saying, well, all the data is interconnected, the whole thing gets out, and they can come and get us. If we made our security come not from holding dear the data, but from other strategic approaches, then we could open up the data and have much more readily accessible data for entrepreneurs to exploit.
I think that reducing supply chain length and having more local food systems is going to increase resilience and increase security in the larger sense that you're thinking. However, saying that is my ignorant approach to something I haven't done yet, and I think there are inherent risks that may come from doing that I don't fully understand. And I think it's just an unknown at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I know we're creating different bartering systems and food safety evaluation systems and probably different diets by embarking on this. And those are the systematic risks that I think, at least from my perspective, I would engage. The larger security risks, I think, in terms of terrorist events or information disclosure events, are lessened by having smaller units, I think.
I'd say from what I've kind of seen in my research and my understanding of security in this context, a lot of the failure, the main failure mode I see is just failing to take it seriously enough, failing to spend enough time contemplating the ways in which a system can be circumvented, the ways in which a system is at risk, and so building in an appropriate amount of time and energy and resources, money to research and understand the threat vectors and address them, I think gets you a lot of the way, and then the sort of decentralization of data reduces the threat profile. It's sort of putting enough systems design effort into designing something for security, I think is a big part of the key.
I have a short answer and a long answer to this question. The short answer is Dr. Wall is solving it all for us in this. So we've got a lot of security by design and privacy by design work that's happening in this that people should be aware of as they're thinking through these kinds of things. But the secondary problem to some of this is we are connecting more things that may not be taking it equally seriously, right? So government may take it seriously, but when I start taking, the public utility into consideration, and the quasi-governmental transit agency, and a bunch of private sector folks who want to drop sensors into my system, I have varying risk tolerances, and I don't have a lot of math to help me make that risk-based decision.
You're only as secure as your weakest link.
Right. And the good news is that like on an IoT kind of network, the traffic is very deterministic, right? So theoretically, math should be able to help me look at the traffic and something that's going on that's weird and make it stop by disconnecting it. But then it still needs to fail over. In a traffic controller cabinet at the side of the road here, there is a physical switch that when stuff goes wrong, it starts to flash red. It's actually a mechanical thing that makes those lights flash red. That's also a place where you can get to a network controller and maybe move laterally to the Department of Transportation's financial system, right? And do other goofy things. I should probably be able to detect that, right? I'm serious, right? Like, we should be able to detect that, right? Because math helps me figure out what's happening on the network. The secondary piece of a lot of this is how do you expect all these different levels of government, different levels with different challenges with funding, to be as equally capable of monitoring all that kind of stuff, right? And so I'll go back to what does the future of these units of government need to look like? What are the skills that they need? And what does it mean to be a high confidence organization, right? We expect these things of nuclear plant operators. Are we going to start to expect these kinds of things of governments? Or are they going to outsource it? And then what's the risk profile of that, right? And what are the public-private partnership patterns for that? There's a lot to consider that, from a management science perspective, there's a lot of assumption that things are just going to remain the same in those local units of government, and I just don't believe that's true. And we need to start thinking now about how to transform those governments for the system that we're hoping to build here.
So we're running a little bit towards the end of our time here, and I want to ask you one very high-level question that was a little bit touched on in the morning session, and is a problem that's plaguing a lot of communities. And you can all sort of answer in your own way. And obviously, if you had a complete answer to this, we'd all take it straight to the White House and we'd solve everyone's problems. How are we going to fix all the food deserts? How are we going to feed everyone? That's it. That's my big question. And I need you to answer it in 3 sentences or less. No.
I think it's getting entrepreneurs to start whittling away the edges by using active markets that are having a surplus, but also, robust economies. Start working in on the outsides. And I think by reducing the cost of entry, by improving the access to technologies, by understanding where the needs are, we can start whittling away those edges. I don't think it's get rid of them now kind of thing. I think it's create markets that erode those boundaries.
Or use drones.
Drones. Oh.
I would submit it's sort of a combination of two things. It's one, and what we talked about today, is giving people greater mobility opportunities. That gets them closer to their food sources, and the other is bringing the food to them. It's both of those that probably are where we have the best chance of improving that.
I feel like we should just talk to those communities and try to understand why the problem exists. So we acknowledge that the problem is there. And by the way, the data is not telling us the truth, right? So part of something happened a while ago, the government misclassifies a bunch of these packaged goods stores, which are basically in English liquor stores, as grocery stores. They don't have food there. They have snacks. There's not nutrition in these places, right? And when you have bad base layer data, you will make bad decisions. So whatever technology solution that we're going to work on, right, going back to the morning, right, we should just actually talk to folks, right? Because we get, if the solution is to band-aid a poor urban planning decision with some technology, that'll work in the short term, but it will not fix the problem, right? So we can try to heal it, but we need to actually undo bad planning decisions.
And I think we need to understand the root cause. Is it economically driven? Is it driven by the business models of the major corporations that supply that run grocery stores? Is it the something that is stifling the grassroots innovation? Is it what? Yeah, I mean it's really getting that root cause and then addressing that.
To the extent that local governments, which you brought up, I mean, I served in county government for 4 years, and our biggest challenge was that we don't have any, but we have more purview over local decisions than the federal government will ever have.
That's right.
And the climate change conversation erupted in the 2008 election cycle while I was in office, and the federal government candidates were all saying, oh, I'm going to get 8% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2015 by doing X, Y, and Z. You know, the government fleet's going to be this, the government building's that. No, 40% was from existing buildings. That's directly attributable to local government's purview. And the government, the federal government, isn't going to be able to necessarily usurp that purview, so they're going to have to motivate behaviors. They're going to have to put in place a system of incentives to motivate local governments to be responsive to these objectives of federal government.
Quick question, and it's very important. So, okay, I feel like we haven't talked about the potential that we can have with change, if we engage change agents. I mean, who are the change agents? We are identifying those people in communities. If your unit is a community, let's say a neighborhood, DCs is split up in.
Can you speak up?
Yeah, I was asking, what is, how much effort is going into identifying those change agents? Those people are going to like the early innovators. And I feel like, again, we can work with those people to sort of convince the people in the community that we need to gather like baseline data, for example, to see where we should make the investments that we need to make. I mean, even if we have the data, some communities are not going to do well if we invest here or here. Not everybody's using Uber Eats, for example. I'm using Hungry Harvest, so I get all this produce right now that nobody wants to eat because it doesn't look pretty. I mean, it's delicious. But I mean, how many people know about that? And it took a couple people talking to me for me to engage, right? And say, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to try it. And I'm hooked. Those kinds of things. So I think people are also like part of the system, and if you can identify those change agents, it might only cost you $70,000 a year, right? Good salary. I don't know.
It's going to be individual to the community and to the time of year. It's going to change quite a lot who those change agents are around different places in the world. I think you're asking for an identification process, not who they are, but rather a way of engaging them and identifying them and providing information to them that they can use to further their objectives.
Yeah.
The answer for me is usually the place where it's not working is being solved by some sort of nonprofit entity or charity. And so they could probably, they would be an interesting place to start to bring that government, academic sort of partnership opportunity, right? Charities generally get strapped for cash, but if you can bring an innovative sort of thing to help them find a way to deliver their services to the place where it's broken more effectively, you're going to win. So, Catholic Charities is out there running a fleet of vans, right, in Dallas to take people to medical appointments, to job training, those kinds of things. I bet you they could use some help. Because Catholic Charities is not a logistics organization, and they're certainly not a vehicle maintenance organization, right? But they're addressing a community need that already exists. That's the kind of stuff that I think you can start to find the value.
And they're asking for help right now.
Yeah, those are the key intents.
All right. Well, I think that just about hits the limits of our time for this panel. So thank you all very much. Please help me thank our panel. What we're going to have next is about a 15-minute break, and then we're going to go into breakout sessions starting at 3:05. And I noticed there's a bit of a misprint in your handouts there, so I'm going to tell you right now where the breakout sessions are going to be based on the sessions that you'd like to go to. So the privacy and data session is going to be in the Abelson room. The workforce session is going to be in the Revel room. The interface between people and technology session is going to be in the Haskins room. And the diversity and inclusion session is going to be here in the auditorium. And that'll be in about 15 minutes at 3:05.